Why doesn't third-party companies make their own Evercade cartridges? And a lot of you might be asking yourself, well, PK, Blaze Entertainment doesn't make their own games or whatever, the creators of Evercade. It's actually, for example, all these different developers and publishers who, make the games that are on these Evercade cartridges. And that's true. That is totally true. But the difference is they aren't actually making the cartridges themselves. Blaze Entertainment, the creators of Evercade, make that. And the reason they do is because they want to have control over this. They want to be in charge of the quality control aspect of it. And they, of course, are in charge of maintaining the systems, the Evercade OG, the Evercade VS, the Evercade EXP, the Super Pocket, the new Evercade Alphas that are coming out, etc. Okay, they're in charge of maintaining the hardware, so they want to have control over the software and how the software interacts with the hardware. So you don't really see actual third-party companies making actual Evercade cartridges themselves. Blaze makes all the cartridges, and basically they do a licensing deal. And I don't know how that licensing deal works with every single company. Maybe the company gets a certain percentage of a cartridge. I don't know. Or maybe they do one flat rate, like Blaze pays them a bunch of money they have the right to manufacture the cart for X amount of years. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I imagine it is something like that. But you don't actually see Evercade cartridges being made by a third-party company. Capcom isn't making Evercade cartridges. Konami isn't making Evercade cartridges. SNK is not making Evercade cartridges. But why? Why is that? And I think there's a lot of very valid reasons to not do that. I mean, some of you might be asking yourselves, what is an Evercade cartridge? This is an Evercade cartridge. Works on an Evercade VS, OG Evercade, Evercade EXP, etc. And this is what's inside. It's basically a ROM board with flash memory soldered to it. And it can be theoretically rewritten, or you can do updates to it, which kind of gets into what I want to talk about actually. Why wouldn't somebody just make their own Evercade cartridges? What's to stop Capcom from making their own Evercade cartridges once the licensing deal that they have with Blaze runs out? And it comes down to is that Evercade games are not pure physical media in a pure sense, though they are physical media. This is a physical cartridge. You put it in a system and theoretically it should just work, I mean, not all the time, but hey, you can make that same argument with the NES. I put it in, it doesn't always work the first time, but they're obviously very different though. An NES cartridge and a Evercade cartridge are very different. But the thing about these Evercade cartridges, they are updatable. In fact, they can be altered and changed, which Blaze has done in the past. I've talked about this. For example, the game on the Jalico collection, Rival Turf, had its entire ROM changed to Russian Beat, which is the Japanese version of that game. It had its entire ROM changed out, basically, through an update through Evercade. So basically, let's say a third-party company wanted to make cartridges. Well, guess what? All Blaze has to do is do an update. They do that update, and that cartridge will not work because it's an unauthorized cartridge, and they have the power to do that. In fact, certain games might not work on certain systems. For example, Namco Collection 1. Namco Collection 1 is a good example. That will not work on my Evercade VS. It just won't work because they have that game locked out for licensing reasons. Blaze never had the rights to use the Namco Collections 1 and 2 on a home console, only on portable consoles. So guess what? Those games are locked out because of the current Evercade software. Now, there are dubious means and dubious ways to get around that, and people have done that. But I think that might be a huge reason why Blaze would never allow third-party companies to do it. They might be able to get away with doing that to some small company, but for example, Capcom, if they did do that to Capcom, it might be quite a bad look for Blaze because for years and years, ever since the Capcom games, the 18 games that are on the Evercade EXP were made digitally, basically they're digital only games that are stored on the Evercade EXP, not the EXPR, which is coming out, but the EXP, the regular EXP, that's white, and the Founders Edition one as well, that's black, yeah, all come with 18 Capcom games. Now, people for years have been like, we want a Capcom cartridge, and Blaze keeps saying, we can't do it. We aren't interested in letting you guys make cartridges of that. But the thing about it is, what's to stop Capcom from making the Mega Man Legacy Collection, for example, on one cartridge, one Evercade cartridge? If they do that, and let's say Blaze decides to lock them out, well, guess what? That's going to create a very negative impact from the customer base. The customer base might not like that because they've been wanting a Capcom cartridge for frickin' years. For years, 2 years at least, they've wanted a Capcom cartridge, and we've never gotten it. I think if they did it to somebody like Capcom, yeah, obviously a pretty negative impact, but they could do it to somebody, a smaller company, maybe they don't care about making the cartridges, and you could, of course, get around this with EverSD software patch to your Evercade, probably, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, people want to collect game cartridges, and they want an official licensed Capcom cart, and they would be, again, very upset, I think, if they did do that. But the other thing, too, is there's some legal aspects of it I think a lot of people haven't considered. You know, look back at Atari versus Nintendo during the whole Tengen games. You know, basically what Atari did was they decided they wanted to make their own cartridges, and they didn't want to get cartridges from Nintendo. So they were like, let's make our own. And they went into the patent office and basically tricked the patent clerk or whatever and stole the schematics of how to make it and how to basically get around all the lockouts that Nintendo had. So Nintendo sued them and won. Okay, so that's why the best version of Tetris is very rare on the NES, because it was the Tengen version is the best version. And basically Nintendo told all the companies to pull those games off the store shelves, because they said this was, you know, a competitor and they shouldn't legally be making those version of the game because they didn't have the rights to make any version of Tetris except like the arcade version or home computer version maybe, or something like that. Yeah, you could see something very similar with Blaze. You could see a situation where Blaze might sue somebody for making cartridges because maybe they have some type of, you know, amount of years on the patent for their cartridges, you know. So that's another possibility, is maybe nobody has the rights to do it. But then again, something like EverSD does exist, but EverSD is not marketed as a EverDrive. It's marketed as a third-party development kit that happens to use emulators, which there's nothing illegal about. But if people do dubious things, like, for example, downloaded pirated content that they don't have or didn't rip themselves, of course, somebody could look at that and say, hey, that's illegal, you know? But I'm not here to get into a debate about the legality and morality of piracy. I'm here to talk about, you know, the Evercade cartridge situation. Like, why don't we see third-party cartridges out there in the universe? And I think that's mostly why. It all comes back to who wants to do this, because Evercade is such a limited audience as it is. If a company did, they might get sued or they might get their cartridges totally locked out of the system. And if somebody like Capcom did it, why would they do it? And would Blaze enforce something like that if it was Capcom? If it was a big enough company that had enough pull, you know. But it also goes back to the first point I just made. Why would anyone do this for Evercade since it's such a small, limited audience? Sure, the Evercade community has a lot of people who will buy anything, everything Evercade, even if they own it on other systems. But it's such a niche audience. So it really begs the question, why would someone make third-party cartridges for Evercade? Anyways, what are your thoughts? Comment below. Love to hear what you have to say. Anyways, stay awesome in this universe. Later.